All right, welcome back to the Jiu Jitsu Mindset. My name's Pete Deeley. Professor Lucas Hubo is out there teaching today, so you guys are stuck with me. As I've mentioned in the past, submission coffee remains not designated a performance enhancing drug, so you're welcome to go to the jujitsumindset.com and we will send it to you monthly should you like to equip yourself for a little advantage in your next competition. I'm so lucky today. I've been chasing my guest around the world. Every now and again, I get to touch base with them. If you've been listening to us, you listened to one of our great podcasts in the past with Mr. Professor Todd Fox, and he's joined me again today, sir. So good to see you.
Good to see you too, man. Thank you for having me back again.
So, Professor Todd, look, today we wanted to talk about a memorable fight or memorable fights. And when I talk to you, I know I could be asking you this. You're someone who always is interested in, like, well, give me the right parameters. What's the right metrics for the conversation of that? And so I know when I say, hey, let's talk about a fight, we could be talking about a firefight in the military or an MMA fight or something that might have happened in the course of your professional life protecting people. Might be you, maybe there's a street fight in the background that might come to mind as well. So I'm going to put the only parameter I'm going to give you is the parameter that this experience either revealed something about your character to yourself or that it shaped your character in some way, that before the fight you were one way, the fight happened, and then you were a little bit different after the fight. So on your experiences in the past, what comes to mind when I ask you that question?
Um, so my thoughts when you ask that question are relevant to something unique or different, like the common fights that I've had, which are because of the realms that I've worked in are nonstop, right? So like I've got 30 years of fighting. A lot of times you're fighting people that are not skilled and not the way you are, for example. And so it's really hard to count that in terms of any value, right? So you do something to somebody who's unskilled, it means nothing. Usually, where I learn lessons, and this is, it could be in jujitsu, it could be MMA, it could be street fighting, is when I don't do so well, or when things don't go the way I planned or the way I trained. That's where I get the best feedback, right? It's not the coolest, sexiest. It's not the "Hey, I'm a hero" vibe that we see on the internet. It's the opposite, right?
Right.
So for me, probably the most memorable was a fight where I got smashed. And leading up to that time, as a young guy, I had developed a reputation for protecting people. Oddly enough, not because I tried to or I set out to do, and I ended up doing that for a career, but because I wasn't afraid to engage people who were bigger or stronger or came from a certain background. So a lot of other kids who would say, "Hey, can you help me?" So I was getting ready to go in the Marine Corps. I was 17 years old, and I was a wrestler and I had done some karate, but I didn't know jujitsu. I didn't know Muay Thai, and MMA didn't exist at this point in
Right.
time. At least the moniker of mixed martial arts. They had Vale Tudo and Brazilian, but it wasn't a thing. So I, like most 17-year-old guys, was aggressive and, I like girls and I liked older girls. And so I had been fortunate enough to get the attention of a girl who was maybe 4 or 5 years older than me. So I'm 17 and she's in her 20s, which was a big deal. And as you know, a lot of problems start with, hey, I liked this girl. So this girl invited me to come to a party, and I was going with a buddy of mine to meet her and some of her friends. And he was a year older, so I was 17, he was 18. And uh, when we got to this party, she greeted us, and it was great. And coming to this party, and probably the average age is like 25. So there's a massive disparity between 17 and
Yes.
25, and what you know and what you do and what you have access to. So we were happy to be there. We were excited to be there. We weren't thinking about it in any other context because we were kids and we were dumb. So as I'm talking to this girl in kind of the first room of the house, and we're chatting, a very attractive girl, this guy comes from across the room after talking to two or three guys and starts kind of walking toward me. He said, "Hey, I need to tell you something outside." So I wasn't so stupid that I didn't know what that meant, right? He was a guy I didn't know. He was a guy probably 23, 24 years old. I'm all of a sudden at this party, I've been talking to this girl 5 or 10 minutes. He's
Right.
talking to other guys. Uh, I know, but I also am so stupid that I'm not gonna let him say that or do that to me, knowing what it means in front of the girl who I came to see.
Right.
And my assumption too was that if I was involved in something, so would my friend that I went with.
Right.
And so we went outside and I walked through the door and he was in front of me by a step or two. And he turned his head a little bit and then he spun around and threw a hook and clocked me in the jaw. And it knocked me back maybe a foot or two. Didn't drop me, just knocked me back. And I'm like, all right, here we go. So I throw some punches like haymakers because I'm a dumb kid.
Hmm.
And I double leg him because I'm a wrestler. And I get his legs up in the air. I get him on the ground. I mount him, not knowing what mount is. I
Right.
mount him and I'm just raining down punches on him. And he started to cover up. And then, it just, when you hit people like that and the ground is behind them, you're, you're eating all the punches or they're eating all the punches.
Right.
So he was done. But in the process, I get hit behind the head with something. I turned around and looked and it was a guy with a glass bottle. And then it was 2 or 3 guys with a glass bottle. And then I'm starting to cover up and trying to move away. And then literally as I'm trying to move away, I run into another guy who's hitting me and I double leg him and get on top of him. And then the next thing I know, I was waking up in a hospital room. So apparently there were about 6 to 8 of them and they had baseball bats and glass bottles. So I wake up in the hospital. My friend's nowhere to be found. I don't know anybody there. Obviously the girl that I was there to visit wasn't in the hospital.
There you are by
Uh,
yourself in the hospital.
yeah, and I recall the doctor and saying, "Hey, what happened?" Asking me questions, and then the next thing was, "Hey, do you want to call your parents?" And so on and so forth. So it was obviously a shit show. And when I think about this, like in hindsight, you do kind of an after action review and you think through what went wrong. And I did this obviously right after, and then I do it again as an old man thinking back. But
Right.
where was my friend? If you have a
Yes.
friend in my mindset and where I came from,
That's right.
literally, if they know that you're going to lose the fight and they know they're going to lose the fight, they step in and they take the ass beating with you, right? So it was a great lesson that if you haven't been in those circumstances or in those environments with the people that are around you,
Right.
you cannot know what they're going to do. And what they say is not always commensurate with what they'll do. In fact, I would argue the opposite. I think that what they say and what they do are usually different. So that was kind of the first aha moment for me that like I can't count on the people that are around me unless they're tested and I've actually been there with them, right?
Right.
Then, understanding certain groups of people don't mix together. And a 17-year-old kid and say a 23, 24-year-old girl or a group of guys, that was not the right environment for me to be in. And I needed to have thought about kind of what I was going into. And I was blinded by, the possibility of a relationship, obviously, with that girl. So,
Right.
um, a great, great lesson to have. Um, One of the other factors that played into the starting and why this guy picked me, it wasn't just jealousy. It was that I had been fighting a lot at the time and I had won all of these fights leading up to that. And so I developed a reputation as a tough guy. Well,
Mhm.
reputation that I thought was a good thing was not a good thing, right? So it'd be much better to be low profile, unknown, and not have any sort of reputation than to come into this particular situation and be seen as, oh, this guy has a title and I want a title shot because he's a dumb kid and I'm just going to take it.
Right.
So that again, that applies today, right? Like
Yeah.
I almost never, unless I'm training jujitsu or unless I'm going to the gym, I don't wear jujitsu, MMA, military, police. I don't wear the clothing. Normally, that's just, I just don't want to draw it to me, right?
Right. Let
So
me ask you a real quick question. Having been beaten up by more than one person, like when the fact that you didn't get killed is a function of accident, restraint on you were not conscious in between your last double leg and the hospital is a whole world of things that could have gone this way or that way, including killing you. If you had a son that was in that situation, from the moment that person said, "Hey, I want to talk to you outside," or "I got something to tell you outside," what lesson would you try to convey to that 17-year-old's mind that you think would have had a good chance of listening to? Like, what would you have said? What would you say to someone that you wanted to keep safe in that same circumstance?
Yeah, I mean, it all starts with going to a spot that you don't actually belong. So you need to know that you don't belong there, right? That's
Right.
number
Yeah.
one. And I didn't have the allies, the enough people with me to
Sure.
offset what was going to happen. So even if my friend at the time, who obviously was no longer my friend after that happened, but
Yeah.
my friend at the time, even if he had gone out, there was no chance. 6 to 8 guys, and there's two of us. The chance of winning is slim to none, right?
Right.
Assuming they know how to fight. Which they did. These guys had fought all the time. So I was lucky to get the 2 that I got out of the 6
Yeah.
to 8 guys. So, I would tell my son, obviously, to think about where they're going, what they're doing in the context of who they are in that specific environment and what challenges could come from it if they ended up there and if things went in the way that someone said something that made no sense and it was rather obvious that they wanted to do something nefarious. They weren't there to congratulate you that you would think about what you say and what you, hey, let me finish this conversation and I'll be at, hey, to your friend, can you talk to him for a second or send other people or have her come out or go out another door? There's so many different options to solve that problem.
Yeah.
The only option that was a bad option was the option that I took, which is I know what this guy wants. I'm going to go give it to him. It
Yeah.
wasn't a smart play, right? Like there are so many things that could have been done. Um, up to and including like, "Hey, man, I don't know, what you want. I don't want any problems with you," which then again could also be seen as weakness, which they'll attack further for that. So you have all kinds of options. All of them would be better than what I did as a young, dumb guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Similar things have happened since in foreign countries. And normally I tell that person, yep, I'm gonna meet you, give me 2 seconds, and then I go out a back door or side
Yeah.
door.
Yeah. Right.
Right. Because now I know, right? And that's the value of having these experiences at a young age, so you don't have to have them as you're older and you have more to lose, right? And
Right.
thinking about that now, like as a 50-year-old guy, I don't know that I'd recover from the type of beating
Yeah.
that I took
Yes. Yeah.
in terms of broken bones and concussions and damage to my head. Um, that's pretty extreme. So happening early on where I'm in good physical health, happening early on where I can apply the lessons of that experience across my life, I think, that's the value to me versus all these other stories I could tell you where I'm destroying guys. I didn't get anything out of it. Like maybe it inflated my ego, but it didn't give me any real life lessons, whereas this did. And another component of that too, and this applies across all fighting, is the reason that it started going south for me was that when I'm on him,
Hmm.
I became target fixated. I wasn't paying attention to what's going on around
Sure.
me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is the big thing with military and law enforcement of why not to fight on the ground. I don't want to fight on certain surface spaces, right? Like concrete or asphalt or rocks. I want mobility. And if I'm on the ground, I have limited mobility. I want elevation so that I have not only the ability to see what's going on, but I also have the ability to disengage. And I had none of those things.
Right.
And I didn't know any better. So again, all of the lessons that I learned from that are lessons that I've applied in life for the last, 30 years since that's happened.
Right.
And I think that kind of illustrates to me some of the lessons learned for fighting and why it's important to, I don't want to say important to lose fights, but why, if you lose a fight, why you should pick it apart and figure out what went wrong and how you correct it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I just I say in my own experience that has a certain analogy to that. The the role of my pride in those circumstances got really abruptly shifted. Of like there are circumstances like, yeah, okay, you got fixated, but the fact is I don't care who you are, if you're engaged, even if there's a skill discrepancy with one-to-one a fight and then there's a bunch of people around you, I don't care how good or bad those. It's a very different thing in reality than most of us where our primary experience is via entertainment, where you think, oh, there's all these possibilities in that. When no, the the most important possibility is to not be in that circumstance. And I learned that no matter what, I would never ever like allow myself. I would do absolutely everything, no matter how distasteful to my pride, to never be in a situation again where I was in a physical conflict with more than one person was one of the things that I took out of a circumstance like that. Um, anyway, oh, well, you have another story. This is not, my stories are
Um,
not interesting. Let's stay with your,
Right. I don't know. You haven't told me your story, so I don't know if they're not interesting. But the cool thing about it is, we're discussing lessons learned, right?
yes.
And for me, that's how you grow.
Hmm.
Uh, and then I think about that even now. Like, obviously, I'm not fighting anymore, but I'm still competing in jujitsu, and so
That's right.
I'll have a loss, and I'll be like, "Oh my god, that was so stupid." I could do all this to this guy. I could have done X and Y and Z. And then you figure out like, oh, well, I wasn't warm. I wasn't warmed up enough. And I hadn't, thought about the strategy enough and whatever it may be. Right.
Right.
Pick it apart and you learn these things. Whereas as a broad stroke, at least for me, when I win, and I can implement or impose my will on a guy, and I apply a certain strategy, and I came in knowing I was going to do a certain thing. I don't tend to look back on it anymore. I'm like, oh
Sure.
yeah, well, I won, I dominated, I submitted, I got the medal. Okay, I'm good. And so I lack the lessons from that. You get the ego boost. It feels good. It's nice to win, but um,
It's not where the improvement's gonna take place because
you
it's just confirmation bias of, well, what I did then is probably gonna work again. And
Mhm.
so, you have no reason to think otherwise because you just got a vote for this works.
Yes. Yeah, and to your point, I win overwhelmingly, but that doesn't mean that it works all the time. So whether I win 85 or 90% of the time, there's still that 10 to 15% of the time where I'm gonna lose.
Right.
And even if I lose by 2 points, I'm still losing. So why is it that I continue to make those mistakes? I need to start breaking that down more, looking at it, evaluating, where the flaw is and um, confirmation bias in jujitsu is a very real thing. It's a real thing in life, but
Yes.
obviously also in jujitsu and fighting. And there are so many variables that you fail to, I shouldn't say you, but we
That
collectively
person, yeah.
fail to look at. So, yeah, so I think for me, that's one of my most memorable because there were a ton of lessons and, ego in a girl and faith in a friend who hadn't proven himself. All of these things proved, that I was missing a lot at that age, right? And obviously after that, the Marine Corps came, the Marine Corps taught me a lot of lessons. But when I think in terms of other fights and components that are relevant, I think about, maybe some of my most unique circumstances and maybe unique techniques that I've used. In my industry, right, in the protection industry, in particular with entertainment and even inside of entertainment, mostly music tours,
Hmm.
uh, I had a fight 20 years ago that guys laugh and joke about to this day. And I see them, because it's a small circle, it's an incestuous pool of people. And I was out with Motley Crue, which is not a secret because Tommy's talked about this before, but I'm out with Motley Crue and I'm running the overall security. And, Motley Crue's known for having a lot of bikers come to the shows, and all types of bikers would show up and we'd have issues with them from time to time. And it would always be me that goes out and tries to talk to them. And, bikers don't like to be told something, especially from a clean cut guy who looks like a military or law enforcement guy, especially law enforcement.
Yeah.
So it was always an argument and there were confrontations and occasionally it would get physical. But in this particular show, we're on the East Coast in an outdoor configuration, what we would call a shed or an amphitheater, right? So you have the stage, and then you have like a pit where it's general admission, and then you have fixed seating, and then you have a big lawn.
Hmm.
And big show, lots going on, and we had a no colors policy. So for people that don't know what colors are, basically when you see Hell's Angels or mongrels or pagans or outlaws or whoever, they have typically like black leather jackets, vest on, and on the back you'll see their logo. We had a no colors policy for the show to prevent issues between different biker gangs, right?
Right.
Out motorcycle clubs. Um, and obviously at a low level, like an hourly wage level, guys who maybe don't have a lot of experience, maybe aren't particularly skilled themselves in terms of fighting, don't have maybe a lot of confidence. They are frequently afraid to tell biker guys, hey, you can't have that. One. And two, bikers are not stupid. They'll crotch that stuff, get it in, and then they'll put it on once they get inside. And then, the chance of a local, $9, $10 an hour security guy going up to a Hell's Angel and telling him, hey, you can't have that is slim to none.
Right.
So this ended up happening in the East Coast, and we were in a town that I won't mention the particular clubs, but where two groups were rivaling for territory. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the show, you see this commotion behind what's called front of house mix. So front of house mix is where they control the lights and the sound. If there's video and if there's lasers or pyrotechnics, a lot of times it's right in the center. So you see it bike racked off or barricaded off. Um, and they're in this little bunker, and all of a sudden, there's just complete chaos behind the bunker, right where the lawn and the reserve chairs come together, where the bunker happened to be. So they're calling me on the radio, Todd Fox, front house, just screaming my name, which was not uncommon. So I go running out to front house mix, and as I get out there, what I noticed was it was literally two groups of bikers, and it spilled over into the front of house mix. So they had gone over the barricade. So literally the guy's controlling in this particular case, it was sound. So the soundboard's there and the guy's mixing sound, and he's panicking, freaking out because his board's, 200, 300 grand, and he doesn't
Yeah.
want to, he doesn't want the show stopped. So he's freaking out and he's telling me what's going on, and I can obviously see it. So I go in, and as I get in, I'm trying to break it up. Well, that doesn't work well because one biker group sees you in the fight and they don't know you, so you're an enemy. The other
Right.
biker sees you and they don't know you, so you're their enemy. So now you're just sandwiched between these guys. So now I'm literally fighting these guys,
Oh my
and
gosh.
I'm fighting guys not because I want to fight, but because now
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
to fight. And as we're fighting,
There's no
I
de-escalation opportunities here.
there
This is a
it's not getting no. This is just run its course.
yeah.
So as I'm getting swung at, I basically I duck and I bob and swing on this guy with a left hook. And when I hit him, I don't know if you know much about watches, but I'm a watch guy, and I had a Rolex on, and it had this
Oh,
Juba
no.
bracelet on it, and so the clasp popped on. Clasp, so and it popped off, and it slid over my hand, right? And I'm like, oh shit. So literally in the middle of this melee at front of house mix at the show, I'm bending over looking for a watch and trying not to get kneed or kicked because these guys
Sure.
wear steel-toed boots and stuff like that. So I'm like this, trying to go down and grab my watch, and all I can hear, I have an in-ear piece, right? So I can hear the radio perfectly. I can't talk because the mic is on my sleeve,
Right.
but hear perfect. Todd Fox is down. Todd Fox is down. So my first priority is find my watch. I get my watch, I stick it in my pocket, and my second priority is not the fight. I'm not down. I'm not down. I dropped my watch. So these guys are busting up laughing from the stage. The show had stopped, and the guy that said that walked over to tell the band members I wasn't down, that I was picking up my watch. And so that became a joke for years and years and years
Oh,
later.
yeah.
The show didn't really stop other than them to like try and figure out what's going on. Eventually, the state police came in and broke it up, pulled the guys out, and there were no significant long-term damages physically.
Well, hold on.
And
How's the watch? Did the watch make it?
watch, man, the watch made it, and that was the priority. Again, probably
Okay.
should have been my priority.
When the Rolex gets,
Yeah.
squirrely, you need to secure the bag. You no two ways about it.
So there's a theme here, right? It's like it's ego and spine and all these other silly, stupid things that get you into trouble or get you hurt. Like, why do you need that watch in that environment? And I didn't. It was just because I'm a watch guy.
Yeah.
So, I was into it. But
You're like, I'll be damned if these guys are going to take the
yeah,
watch from me.
hell no,
Yeah.
hell no.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm in the fight. That happens. And again, lessons learned. In that case, unlike the previous fight, it was very funny, right? So
Mhm.
I I get a chuckle out. The guys tease me about that all the time, and just talk trash. But that's kind of funny. When I think about fighting and like my most memorable spontaneous reaction to aggression, I think about some guys that some of my teammates from back in the day, and this would have been 25 years ago, so old school. We'll call the guys Hodger, we'll call the guys Harald and Esteban. That's what we'll call these guys.
Okay.
And we were out, young guys, out drinking, chasing girls, doing stupid stuff, and then we're gonna go move from one site to the next site, and I go next door to pick up my buddy because we're 2 bars side by side, and I'm in a car in the parking lot of the bar, and some guy's saying something to him crazy, and, talking trash because he's drunk and he wants a fight. And my friend is a big dude who doesn't start fights, he doesn't deal with fights, he walks away from it. Really great fighter, great athlete, talented dude, phenomenal college wrestler, jiu-jitsu black belt, like, he
What?
didn't want it.
Yeah.
So he just, yeah, whatever. So this guy's talking trash to him, and I'm pulling up, and he's on the driver's side, right? So I'm talking to my friend about getting in, and he needs to kind of smash in because we have several people in the car. So I'm telling him to come in, and this guy's like, "You try to run from the fight, I'll kick your ass too. Get out of that car, boy, blah, blah." And he's just talking crazy shit to me. And I'm just laughing at him. Well, it pissed him off that I was laughing.
Sure.
But then what he did is he reached inside the car and grabbed my arm, and he went back like this.
What?
And
He wasn't
instinctively,
close to the watch by any chance, was he?
at this point, I hadn't secured enough money to buy
Okay.
him.
All right. This is pre-Rolex. Okay.
Well,
Different. Okay.
yeah, this is pre-Rolex time, which is, relative to the current days, it's poverty. But
Yeah. Right. Right.
so my guy, Fodger, he gets in the back of the car, and as he's getting in the back of the car, this guy grabs my hand because I guess he just wants to fight. And he's drunk, he's whatever. So he grabs my wrist, and instinctively, I just circled, right? So re-grabbed. So I re-grabbed, and my other hand was already on the wheel. So as he's back here, and I just re-grabbed and stepped on the gas, boom, we're going. And he's then trying to hold on to me in the car, and it was the best unplanned forward roll at 30 pounds ever seen.
Whoa.
He 4 forward rolls like somersault, and then the last one kinda came up standing, and he was discombobulated, but, it was beautiful. It was
He got 4 forward rolls out of the ride.
Well, he was like,
Actually,
yes, it was amazing. Well, thank God for my sake, this guy tucked his head, because if he hadn't tucked his head, it would have been a bad day for me and probably a bad few years.
yeah. Right.
So thankfully, it didn't appear that he was hurt. I didn't go back to find out simply because
Yeah.
at that point in time, it was time to go, and I didn't want to have the fight anyway. So I think that was my most memorable unplanned
Escape.
it's just a natural response, re-grab, go.
Right.
And his skills, should be noted because that was talent.
That is. That's a.
I don't know what his level of training was, but maybe he did gymnastics. He was very good at tumbling, and to come up after that level of speed, to come up standing, and to be intoxicated and do that, that guy is a champ.
He might needed to have been intoxicated to achieve that level of flexibility. Like
Well,
sober, it might have been a problem, but
Yeah, so he probably would have been much more rigid sober, but
exactly. Yeah.
if he was loose and relaxed,
Yeah.
that flow state was on, and it paid dividends for his health.
Well, as I said, conflicts reveal things about us, and it might have revealed to him that if he's going to be mouthy, he might as well be drunk. So that way he can at least be, able to go with whatever flow comes his way.
Well, I mean, so you're making an argument for being drunk. If you know you're going to have a fight, you just need to loosen up a little bit, have a drink.
Well, look, you're the one who told the story. You're the one who what's your story? As I listen, I mean, there's so many interesting kind of, I think those stories all have different outcomes if the ball bounces differently, right? To the story of you chasing the watch is funny. It's not funny if someone kicked you in the head and that's that, right? Like
Exactly.
that's the fact that you woke up in the hospital versus not woke up at all. That's probably a pretty thin difference. And particularly young men rarely have a sense of the amount of damage they're inflicting. And the same thing here, right? Like that's sort of, and when I watch other young men out there in the world and I think about what is the right um, avenue for me, like always de-escalation, getting out of it always seems to be the right path of action. At the same time, particularly in young men's lives, there has to, in my opinion, there's value in having come up against giving into the aggression and experiencing the aggression, which is a paradox that I don't have resolved within myself because, I have children. I uh clear about like be safe. The first thing is safety. Extricate yourself, but don't be afraid if you have to like assert yourself. However, I look at my own experiences with that. It's only because things went well that those become stories and not like the end of the road. And so I find it um, the wisdom is generally a backward looking tool. It's wise in reverse. It's at the time you're doing the best you can do um, there. When you think about what those things reveal to you, did they reveal uh, anything that when you look back on that if you didn't have those things you wouldn't have known? Like other people aside, okay, you're right. You don't know what your friend's going to do.
100%.
Yeah,
And you're hitting on them, which is that, one, there's a lot of luck involved, right?
yeah,
You're in a specific place at a specific time with a specific group of people. You're in a specific state of health. Things unfold a certain way. And like you said, it goes one way, you're dead. It goes another way, and
yeah,
it goes like, and things can change quickly. But when you evaluate force use, and this is kind of where you can give guidance to kids or younger people that don't have the experience, you need to make yourself safe. And you have every legal right to utilize force to defend yourself. Now, once that person is no longer a threat to you, you must stop force use, right?
right,
You cannot continue past that point, or it's no longer self-defense.
right,
So from that perspective, I think that's a pretty good moral compass to instill in another human. Don't allow someone to put you in a position where they may be able to hurt you. And if that starts to unfold, protect yourself. And that would be justified in all 50 states under the Constitution.
right.
And, whether you're talking about the individual or you're talking about a Leo who's using
Yeah,
force. So that's an important thing to think about. And I'm in a foreign country, and as you can hear, there's dogs howling in the back because the monkeys are crossing through right now. They can't get to the other side of the fence where the monkeys are, climbing trees, getting kittens.
well, who knows what sort of interspecies fight could be ahead of us on this very conversation. So if when our YouTube views cross 3 billion, I'm gonna have to tell you it was worth it that you took on the tribe of monkeys behind you. So
They're fortunate for me, even though there are a lot of them, they're pretty small. So I might be able to survive, although they're crazy strong. So
yeah, I was gonna say, well, hopefully we don't have to put it to the test. But if we do, it's all in the service of likes and subscribes. So what can I tell you?
yeah, one thing when you were talking just now that you kind of brought to the forefront of my mind is the federal mantra for active shooter is run, hide, fight, right? So running away from the threat. Now, that could be a thing. Hey, you see a problem, you see it unfolding, try to leave the environment.
Right,
Uh, Hide, let's say I can't leave for whatever reason. Maybe I blend instead of hiding, because I'm not going to go hide in my particular context. So I
right.
might blend into the environment, right, instead of hiding, which is hiding in plain sight.
Hmm.
And then fight when I have no other options and you're on me. The fight's on, and then utilizing whatever tools I have, in that particular environment to win the fight until you're no longer a threat. So I think, we kind of come full circle, but you're on point in that the decisions you make, like me in my 20s, are not the decisions I'd make at 50. In fact, I would be doing something very different. And I think you also have to evaluate it from the other side of things and say, because I'm more hesitant now, right, for
Right.
to do morally the right thing, but also, financially, and I don't want the civil liability, I don't want the criminal liability. Do I have a bit of exposure because I'm slower to act and I'm slower to take it where it needs to go? And I think the answer is yes. If with this age and the knowledge I have and the experience I have and the foresight I have, if something does happen and I want to kind of evaluate it a little bit longer, whether that's 3 seconds longer or 3 minutes longer,
Right.
does that create a potential hazard for me? And the answer I think is yes.
That your interest in certainty rather than your instinct to go one way or the other has compromised your safety on some level. Is that what you just said? Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah, I find it, yeah, that's hard for me because I don't know, uh, what my disposition is. I'm rarely you were in a lot of circumstances where there's a ton of variables, all of which could go all are which are almost designed to potentially be confrontational. So I'm not in those circumstances. When I am, my pride has been swallowed so many times. I'm used to the taste of it. Like it's hardly the end of the world for me to step back from something that looks like, oh, the 54-year-old guy makes actually step in here and be a tough guy.
Look, I think there's a lot of value to that in most circumstances and inside the United States, with me spending an overwhelming percentage of my year overseas and dealing with scenarios that you can't use logic or reason. Maybe that person's survival is linked to whatever the bad thing they're going to
Yeah,
do,
right.
or maybe they're so conditioned by a harsh environment that life is meaningless. So if I bring your, residential U.S. safe perspective into those environments, the chance of survival for me
Yeah.
goes down considerably. And I'm trying to do quite the opposite. So I think it's relative, right? Again, we were talking about context before. In the context of your situation and your life and who you're around and what you're doing and what you're willing to do, those things change. And as they change, your decisions will change, right? Because theoretically, you should be basing your decisions on some type of analysis or some type of history or some type of projections. And you have a lot more of those now in your 50s than you did, say, in your 20s. But also, like you noted, your reality is very different from my reality because of where my job puts me and what my job is and how I see things because I've been forced to be in this environment for 30 years.
Yeah.
We're not talking apples to apples anymore.
Right. For me, when I think about what shaped my opinions about, um, what's appropriate response, I think about being a kid and having a lot of tough guy uncles. So like uncles that were, I don't, how shall I put it? I don't want to call them outlaws. That's probably making too much out of it, but not people in ordinary, just sort of get up, go to work kind of, uh,
We're still
lifestyles.
maybe on the fringe.
Maybe a bit on the fringe, right? Not like, and very moral people. I don't want to call them like anything, all of that, but with, uh, and I don't know whether this will sound familiar or not, but my family, both sides of the family come through Ellis Island in about the early 1920s. I'm 54 in the early 70s. The dynamics of what it meant to live in the projects of New York and then the certain behaviors that were appropriate to that circumstance. And then in the 1950s, they moved to Long Island. However, a certain attitude about how do you behave as a man in the world in particular, what sort of going too far verbally and not, and how fast were you to get into a physical confrontation? I would say that by the time I'm a young person, there are vestiges of behavior present in my family that are more appropriate to 1940, the projects of New York, than Long Island in 1970. So as a kid, these were heroic people to me. I loved these. They were like athletic, strong, powerful, interesting, funny. They loved me. They were very much my models of like, well, what I thought I wanted to be as a man. But then as I entered into my late teens and I had my own share of those things, and then I would be in conversations, uh, the financial costs of those things alone. Like I had a conversation with this uncle. I was about 17, and his just got out of the hospital because he needed some surgery on his forearm. And I'm like, well, what happened? He said, oh, look, PDD, we're out at this bar. This guy says something about my girl. I can't have that So he tries to get away from me. And look, by the time he reached his car, he thought it was safe. So I punched through the window, pulled him out, gave him his beating. Now, okay, he defended the honor of his girl in the midst of whatever could have possibly been said. And then he had a medical bill that was going to follow him for an awfully long time that I can tell you he didn't afford. And I had a series of conversations and observations with my own family of like, well, what really is going on here? And so as I kind of looked at my own behavior, um, and put it up against like, well, what am I trying to evolve into? These guys were 20, 25 years older than me. And those, rules of the street were still kind of governing ordinary life. And I didn't want to go that route. However, there was a certain cleanliness to like where the lines were. I mean, they just went and they would obligate you. You talk about, your friend didn't show up. In my family, even as a kid, like I'm talking a 14, 15-year-old kid, I remember being out with them. And if something happened that people didn't like, there was no ifs, ands, or buts. Collectively, now you were obligated to, whatever nonsense of the moment on the high school basketball court. I remember just silly things that, when I think back on it,
Yeah,
it
I
was
mean,
the opposite of looking to protect me. It was more like, we're going to induct you.
but there's a theme here too, right? So the things that we were discussing before, the things related to your family, the context that you gave me is context on context, right?
Right.
So what we're talking about now is relative to that environment at that time with that group of people. And it is appropriate, right? It's appropriate at that point. And one of the things that we're not talking about that we should be talking about is what's at the core of all of these issues? What's the one thing that's at the core of all these issues? So let's say, let's go back for a second to the first thing we talked about. Why was I at the party?
Yeah, right, right, right,
It's a girl. Well,
right.
why would I be driven to go to a party because of a pretty girl,
Right.
right? All of this links to survival. So the same thing. Why did your family leave country X and
Yes.
have to process it Ellis
Right.
Island?
Yes.
Survival.
Yes.
Why, when they got there, did they have to have a tough mindset and develop this ethos? Survival.
Yes.
Why? Everything keeps coming back, right? And I look at things through the lens of survival. Now, it may make no sense to you right now. And you, for example, you talk about kind of evolving. Well, it's temporary. Your evolution is temporary because if things fall apart in the US,
Sure.
your ability to go back to that survival mode would
Yes.
be evolving. And
Yes.
you would currently be devolving, right? Like
Yeah.
you're
Right.
not
Right.
evolving if the situation gets bad, right? So it's in context and it's in relationship to not only how you see it, like genetically, how your autonomic nervous system sees it or feels it or experiences it, right? Because your brain
Yeah.
literally behind your eyes are taking, you're
Yeah.
extruded from your brain. And
Yeah.
now all you're having generations of DNA in you that is trying to process what's going on relative to survival. And you're trying to override that so that it's in the context of 2024, 2025, and you're an elevated man or an enlightened man, lose the connection to survival and why it's important. And it's not forever that this elevation that you're attempting is going to be of value.
Well,
It's
okay. Well, I love it. Elevation might have touched the nerve, I think. And I'll give you like some things that I think about. Be curious about your reaction. Like when I think of the value of the and let I'm not let me not overstate myself in terms of like fights, but I've been in some fights in my life, right? So I've had some fight, and the value of those fights early on was the first value was to show me if somebody punches me in the face, I do not die. Like I shouldn't be so afraid of that.
an important lesson for a young boy to have.
It was a very important lesson. I was a New Yorker out west. I was picked. There was a lot of reasons in which I needed to know that people come to push me around, that I didn't have to tolerate that per se. Um, and I think it gave me a sort of resilience in other ways that I don't know I could have got without someone punching me in the face and me being to live to tell the tale. I live in Arizona, and locally there was a teenage little group of boys, and they beat to death a kid in the last year or so. So they outside it was a house party. Outside the house party, they beat this kid to death, and I had I've been in I feel like some meaningful street confrontations in that. Um, and maybe some that could have bounced in that particular direction, but mostly not, I would say. And so it's hard for me to think of I don't live in a community where that survival instinct is something that is required to get down to the grocery store and back. Like this is pretty
You're
peaceful
talking about
suburbia.
what you're referencing is what is at the forefront, right? You're talking about prefrontal cortex. Like you're thinking in
Yes.
my neighborhood, I don't need this. Your genetics aren't.
Right.
They're separate, right? Your amygdala response is not related to, oh, I live in a really nice area. I'm in Mesa and it's very comfortable and casual and this is
Right.
happening. So when you see something or experiencing something, it's not in isolation, right? So you might feel like, yes, I can just rationalize through this and I'm good. You can have a different survival response, right? So if you think about a situation where maybe you have auditory exclusion or you have some type
Yeah.
of
Right.
tunnel, or you start to lose some of your fine motor skill or pulling of the blood to your chest, or maybe you get a little shortness of breath, could be anxiety. Um, those things you didn't choose. And the fact that you're in a relatively safe environment doesn't stop those things from occurring,
I agree.
right?
So let me ask you a real specific question because I tell you that story with this question in mind. I feel like to a certain extent, my street fighting experiences were an inoculation for more street fighting experiences. Like they were violent enough, but they weren't so violent that I didn't survive them, and they weren't so violent that I carried some injury for their. And it also showed me that like you don't want to continue down this road because you just become increasingly more lethal. So I'm wondering this, Professor Todd, in this time when we are reducing the friction between boys in particular, that do you think that there's um, maybe less of that with an absence of that mid ground of violence where it's more than pushing, but you didn't kill somebody? Does that lead to things like this where now someone's violent and they don't have any experience with it, and now they're just taking it to their amygdala's in control and they're murderers now at 17? Or am I making that too much of that
Yeah,
dynamic?
right.
And
So those are not completely isolated instances. And I had one where I live. It happened to be with a female,
mm,
uh, and she had fought another girl, and there were a group of girls there that were present, and she ended up in a coma with
mm,
severe brain damage and all
okay,
kinds of
yeah,
stuff. So, these are not completely. I said, but they don't happen that frequently, and I
right,
think in a different time maybe they would have. So we've gone away from that. I think if you attempt to de-escalate, that's a great approach to start. But the problem with de-escalation is that you're not the only person that has a say in it.
right, right,
The other person gets a say. And sometimes, and I'm not talking about all of the time, because you have to give me specific details for us to talk about a scenario, but sometimes a very quick subduing of that person or that situation
yeah,
is preemptive
yes, right,
de-escalation.
yeah,
So if I know, for example, if I know this person's going to get aggressive or violent or nasty or whatever, and I can put them in a control position,
right,
then I go into that very quickly because I don't let it ramp up to them punching me in the face, elbowing me in the face, pulling a knife out, pulling a gun out.
right,
So I may act first in an attempt to de-escalate it or to find the lowest common level of force that I can utilize,
right.
stop it from getting to deadly force. So I think it's hard to know that as a kid. There's nothing you can do or I can do to give that threshold or barometer or that measuring stick to a kid to know like, is that too far? They're dealing with it the best they can with what they have, right? Because
Yeah.
their brain is undeveloped until they're 25 years old. So when you talk about a 13-year-old kid or a 16-year-old kid or a 20-year-old kid, their brain's not fully developed. Why is it that this expectation for them to behave like a 50-year-old
Right. Right.
we're that age? It's not realistic, right? So it's unfortunate when that happens. I don't like seeing that. That bothers me. That upsets me. But I also think that you can't manage it away. Like, oh yeah, I'm just going to say these words to this kid, and then that's it. It's going to be good. It doesn't work that way because now you're
Yeah.
talking about, let's say somebody had a traumatic event, and you say, man, just get over it. It's okay. That doesn't work. It
Right.
doesn't
Right.
function that way because it's deep inside the human, and so it takes time and energy and effort to get to that point. And in the process, unfortunately, bad things sometimes happen to good people and bad people. And I'm not an advocate for that. I don't think that violence is the solution every time. I just don't believe that there are times where violence is bad. I think
Okay.
it's in the context of the situation may be the solution. And obviously, governments obviously believe that even though they can send you to jail for life or even give you the death penalty for using violence, when they try diplomatic means and those means fail, we end up resorting to violence still in 2024. And I
Right.
guarantee in 2025 and beyond. So,
Yeah.
it's just a part of who we are as a human species. I don't think there's a way to escape it. I know we feel like, we've evolved to the point where we don't need it anymore. I don't believe that's the case because I'm watching it all around me. I watch it with animals. I watch it with humans.
Yeah.
I watch them, use violence in different ways, right? Like when they take away certain things from people, like a means of making money, they do it physically by saying, if you do this act, we're going to arrest you. And wait a second, I need to do that thing to make money to pay for my family to do whatever. So even people that say they don't believe that, violence is necessary, I see them using violence. They just use it in a different way.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I agree with that. And I think part of where I was going when I think about what to do with this was tragedy in a terrible way. It was tragic in like all these different levels. And when you talked about the one friend you had that was a bigger guy, college wrestler, jiu-jitsu black belt, my experience with top flight fighters is that they're actually like among the least violent people outside the context of when they're meant to be violent. Then that and a lot and there's a lot of we could talk endlessly probably about like what does it mean to carry yourself comfortably in the world where you're not feeling that sense of threatenedness. But even among kids, I feel like um, my exposure to being in boxing clubs and early karate and having people sort of put me in those they were false violence, right? Like you put boxing gloves on and you get popped in the nose with a boxing glove. It's a inoculation of sorts. But it also sort of, I don't know, it just feels like it changed my relationship to some of those other potential street fights in the future, which is
Yeah.
just,
Just to be clear, I'm not disagreeing with anything you've
yeah, yeah, no,
said.
no, I know.
We
Yeah,
were
yeah.
we were just talking about different components of it, and
Hmm.
reason that I stuck with the evolution component
Right.
is because as evolved as we want to be, even the people that are anti-violence, when it comes to it, they're having other people do their
Yeah.
violence on their behalf.
Yeah.
Well, they say they don't believe in that, then they're sending people to go do violence. So I don't disagree with you on anything that you said, and I think it's
Mm.
very logical. But you have that. You make the point about fighters, right? Like if you're a fighter and you have skills, um, maybe you are more restrained. Are you restrained because you know what you can do? Are you and you have high confidence? Or are you restrained because you don't want to hurt somebody morally? Are you restrained because you don't want the civil implication? Are you restrained because you don't want to get hurt and miss out on your next fight?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know those reasons, but there comes a responsibility with it. Just like for gun owners, you're in Arizona. In Arizona, they have constitutional carry, which means assuming you don't have a felony and assuming you're a U.S. citizen, you can legally carry a firearm on your person, concealed or exposed in most counties there. So,
Right.
and you have that. You have a responsibility to protect that and not leave it exposed to somebody, to be able to defend that thing, to not use it frivolously, to not brandish it. With these tools or capabilities that we have additional responsibilities, and that's why, again, you try to control the emotional components that come with it, right? I don't go to a certain place. Let's say I don't go to this part of town, and I definitely don't go there after dark, and I definitely don't go to that place after dark, with by
Yes, right,
myself.
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I start to reduce the exposures because I'm smart enough to do that. And then when you talk about your kids and your family members, you try to do the same thing, saying, hey, Johnny, what do you think would happen if I went to South Central on a Saturday night at 3 a.m. and I wore my Rolex and I had my $10,000 suit on and I pulled up in my new Bugatti and I got out and just started walking around? And you give them these examples so that they have to think through, well, what would happen? Well, is that normal? Is it not normal? Right? Are emotions high there? Are emotions low there? Are behaviors consistent with this activity or that activity? Are they likely to do X or Y? And you walk them through it to give them the experience without having the experience, right?
Right,
Nothing replaces the experience.
right.
So all you can do is kind of talk through it. And that's one way of addressing it. But nothing will replace you getting punched in the face. Nothing will replace the lessons your crazy uncles taught you, from an immigrant's mindset.
Right.
These are pretty important things. And I think we lose lessons along the way. So like I would never look down at any of the things that we'll go through.
Yeah, yeah.
I would cherish them in a way and put them in a box and say, hey, that might not be so applicable to me right now with what I have and where I'm at, what's going on. But those were survival tools that led to my creation, right? Now, genetically, you're here because people were able to survive, right?
Without it
Using
with yeah, without a doubt. I mean, and it's funny because I mean, in the Irish side of the family, it was, they were IRA soldiers that came across and they were when you talk about survival, it wasn't in the theoretical sense, like they were leaving where situations in which their lives were definitely at risk. And it's funny as you say that, like I love all of those experiences that I had as a boy, like that as a young man. A lot of it has to do with the attention I got in those conversations and in those moments and those little stair steps of respect that, like, although they loved me for who I was, they did have they did like it that I'd gotten in whatever scraps I'd gotten in that for them. And I liked that. I liked the recognition. And I think I had enough balance in my life of, there were pretty ferocious men in the family, but really never wanted to mess with the women. They were truly they were the hammers of the group anyway. And it in terms of force and power and all those things, what's appropriate for circumstances. It was a rich stew of a childhood that would be hard to replicate. Uh, it was a very unique kind of, I think, time in history. And one of the things that when I listen to you, I know, you're all over the world and you're in all these different contexts that it feels like it deepens the human experience to have to be aware of how to accommodate the dominant, ethic that you're around in, that instead of insisting that everybody attune themselves to you, that you then have a broad perspective on what the human experience is because you've been around so many different, in every way, economic, social, ethnic, all of those things.
So you hit on a totally, encompasses fighting, but outside of fighting, it encompasses everything, which is when I get into a situation or into a space or into a country, it's not the country adapts to me. Not me. It's not Fox, not me as an American, not me as a protector. They do no adaptation relative to me. I must adapt on all levels to them. So, I was talking to somebody about this recently. I go into a space and bribery is the norm from the lowest level to the top level. Well, we may have bribery in the US, the very top levels,
Right.
right? That we don't see happening. But imagine you go to, whatever city you're in in Arizona, outside of Phoenix, or inside Phoenix, and you try to bribe a cop for something, you're going to jail, right? Like, we don't have corruption at the bottom and the middle overwhelmingly. All of
Mhm.
our centralized. So, when I go into a third world country, right, like I'm in now,
Mhm.
uh, they do business through bribes. And the US government knows that, for example, they just call them facilitation fees. I have to get out of the mindset of that's the wrong thing to do and we don't
That's
do
right.
that.
Yeah.
I don't agree with it. I was taught, I mean, that's morally repugnant for us in our culture. But now I'm in theirs. So I have to get over it. And in the beginning, the first few years is like, I'm not paying a bribe. I'm not like, look, you need to be able to facilitate these things. So
Right.
you now want to, but if you want it to get done, you're going to have to. And that's
Yeah.
part of doing business. And it's not to say change your moral compass, because when I come back to the United States, you wouldn't find me doing something like that,
Sure.
right? It's adapting to the environment. Again, back to common thread, which is survival, right? How do I survive? And I survive through these adaptive mechanisms that are put into place by the people before me, the people after me, and our genetics carry on
Yeah.
because people in front of us were able to adapt to the environments. If they don't, you cease to exist, right? Like,
Right.
and then your genes, like the gene pool starts to freaking shrink. So
Yeah.
all of this stuff comes back to that. Like, why do we make these decisions? Why are we more apt to make it when we have more testosterone in our body?
Right.
We have less experience, and there's definitely a relationship there, right? And I would not make the same choices doing it again where I'm at now. But how would I know that?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It would be, and who knows, 50 years from whatever that person was to now. I mean, it's just at the end of the day, we're all, the equation, the sum of everything that went on before. Well, listen, Professor Todd Fox, the danger here is that I like talking to you, and it's going to be 3 hours later, and I'm going to return the rest of the day to you. But thank you so much for a great conversation, and look forward to.
Love talking to you.
Yeah,
Talking about
likewise,
these
brother.
movements is great, and it makes people think about stuff beyond just a physical interaction. So it's good stuff, and I appreciate you bearing with me. I know we've had a few schedule changes based on my clients and the environment that I'm in now. So thank you for that.
No, of course, brother. All right.